大家好，我是小满。今天分享的视频有点颠覆外国人的认知，只因这位美国博主抛出了一个极其犀利的核心观点：英语在某种程度上是一门毫无逻辑的缝合怪语言，而汉字与中文则展现出了令人惊叹的严谨与自洽。今天我们就跟着这位美国博主的视角，来看看他是如何用严密的逻辑和生动的例子，证明中文对英语在造词法上形成的降维打击的。废话不多说，我们直接看视频。
think Chinese is one of the hardest languages on the planet. But what if I told you it's actually way more logical than English? So we've helped over 30,000 people learn Chinese using our platform, and one of the most common things new members tell us is how surprised they are by how much sense the language makes once they see how the words are built. So by the end of this video, you'll understand the secret behind unlocking the logic of Chinese words, and once you do, your journey to fluency becomes dramatically faster, way easier, and honestly, a lot more fun. So before I show you how logical Chinese words are, I just want to explain why they're so logical, because once you understand the reason, every example I show you is going to hit a little bit differently. And to do that, we need to take a quick look at how English got so messy in the first place. So English started as a Germanic language, right? Brought to Britain in the 5th century by tribes from what's now Germany and Denmark. If you saw that original language written down today, you genuinely would not recognize a single word. Then the Vikings showed up in the 8th and 9th centuries, speaking Old Norse, bringing everyday words like sky, egg, give, get, they, them, and their. Then the Normans invaded from France in 1066 and ruled England for 300 years, flooding the language with French and Latin, which is why we say cow for the animal, but beef for the meat, sheep but mutton, pig but pork. So the English farmers raised them, and the French aristocrats who ruled us at that time ate them. So that's why the names are different. Then during the Renaissance, scholars imported even more Latin and Greek for science and medicine, words like atmosphere, skeleton, biology. And the result is modern day English vocabulary is roughly 25% Germanic, 30% French, 30% Latin, and the rest is a mix of Greek, Norse, and dozens of other languages. It's kind of a patchwork, a linguistic Frankenstein, if you will. And that is why so many English words make no sense on the surface. Butterfly, for example. What does butter have to do with flying? No one knows. Pineapple, not a pine, not an apple. Hamburger, nothing to do with ham. It's named after the city of Hamburg. The roots are buried under layers and layers of borrowed vocabulary from completely unrelated languages. Now, does English have some logical compound words? Yes. Playground, sunflower, bedroom, football. These make perfect sense, but they are the exception, unfortunately, as opposed to the rule. Mandarin Chinese could not be more different from all this. The written language traces back to at least 3,500 years ago, oracle bone inscriptions from the Shang dynasty around 1250 BC. The spoken language is almost certainly much older, possibly 5,000 years or more. Now, Chinese has absolutely changed over that time. Old Chinese sounded nothing like modern Mandarin. It probably didn't have tones, and most words were a single syllable. But over the centuries, the sound system simplified, tones developed, and with only about 400 distinct syllables in modern Mandarin, around 1,200 including the tones, more and more words started sounding the same. And that's where compound words came in. So the language naturally started combining characters into two-syllable words, and each character brought its own meaning, creating words that were easier to tell apart and more specific. So the vast majority of modern Mandarin vocabulary, almost all of it, in fact, are these compound words. And because each character still carries its original meaning, the logic is built right in. You can literally see the meaning of most Chinese words if you know the characters. Unlike English, Chinese wasn't invaded and overhauled by a series of unrelated languages. The characters evolved in how they look, from oracle bones to bronze script to modern simplified characters, but the writing system has been shockingly consistent for over 3,000 years. Each character still represents a meaningful unit, and when you combine them, you get words that make sense. Now, Chinese does have some outside influence. Buddhism, for example, brought Sanskrit-derived vocabulary over 1,000 years ago, and modern Chinese has borrowed concepts from the West, but even then, Chinese usually translates the meaning rather than borrowing the sound. So English, for example, took the Greek word telephone, right? Most English speakers have no idea that tele means far and phone means sound, whereas Chinese built 电话, electric speech. The logic is right there. So that's kind of the backstory. English has been pulled apart and reassembled from 5 or 6 different languages. Chinese, however, evolved internally, almost completely, developing a compound word system that preserves the logic of its building blocks. And that has massive implications for how you learn vocabulary. Let me show you what I mean. So I've told you that Chinese compound words are logical, but I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want to show you why they're logical structurally. So every compound word in the Chinese language, every single one, conforms to one of 7 types. Now, once you know these 7 types, you can look at almost any Chinese word and understand the logic behind how it was put together. I actually made a whole video a few years back breaking down all 7 types in detail, but let me just run through them quickly with you with examples, because this is the foundation for everything that comes next. So first up, we've got verb what. The first character is a verb, a doing word, and the second character is what's being done to. 吃饭, eat meal, to have a meal. 看书, to look, book, right, to read. 洗澡, to wash, bath, to bathe. 游泳, float, swim, to swim. 跳舞, jump, dance, to dance. 唱歌, sing, song, to sing. The next type of word is verb result. So the first character is a verb, again, doing word, but now the second character tells you the result of that verb, what happened because of the action. So for example, 说明 is one of my favorites of this. Speak clear, to explain. So I spoke, and then the result is it became clear, explain. 提高, raise, high, to improve. You raise something until it's high, that's improving it. 打破, hit until something is broken, to break. 推开, push, open, push something open. Another one that's very common and very useful for Chinese learners, 听懂, listen plus understand, to understand by listening. Now this next type I call biased, because the second character is always way more important. It's the main category. And the first character just kind of adjusts it, like a subcategory. 飞机, so 机 is showing that it's some kind of machine, that is the category, whereas 飞 is adjusting it to say, hey, it's the flying type of machine. It's an aeroplane. And there's, of course, hundreds of these particular words with 机 as the second character or the last character signifying the category of machines. And all of the words, of course, mean some kind of machine. What about 火车? So 车 is saying, hey, this is some kind of vehicle, and 火 is saying it's a fire vehicle. And no, it's not fire engine. 火车 is actually train, because trains used to be powered by fire, right? 牛肉, 牛 is cow, and 肉 is meat. So the meat is the most important one, saying, hey, it's a kind of 肉, it's a kind of meat, and cow is just telling you what subcategory of meat. So this is the most common type of Chinese word you'll come across, and it's the one where the logic is most immediately obvious. So obvious, in fact, it almost makes the language a bit boring. But with this next type, we call parallel, both characters carry equal weight. So neither one dominates, and there are a few different ways this shows up. Sometimes both characters mean the same thing or something very, very similar. So 朋友, for example, both characters mean friend, and the final meaning is friend. With 帮助, both characters mean help, and the final word means help. 道路, road means road. 学习, study and practice. Those are kind of not exactly the same, but very, very similar. That is the final meaning of to learn. Now you might be wondering, why use 2 characters then if they both mean the same thing anyway? Well, remember the homophone problem I mentioned earlier? 2 syllables are easier to tell apart than 1. And so it removes that ambiguity. Other times the 2 characters are opposites, and together they create a broader concept that kind of encompasses both sides. So for example, 大小 means size, and is composed of big and small. So that's size. 左右 is left, right, and it means roughly or approximately. 多少, many and few, means how much or how many. This is one of my favorites. 开关 is open, close, literally, and it means a switch. 买卖, buy and sell is business or trade. 矛盾, spear and shield, that's contradiction. And this one has a great backstory. There's an ancient Chinese story about a merchant who claimed his spears could pierce anything, and he also claimed that his shield could block anything. So someone on the crowd asked, so what happens when your spear hits your shield? And that's why we come up with that contradiction meaning. And then there's a small but very interesting group of parallel words where the connection between the 2 characters has actually been lost over time. So the word 窗户, for example, means window, but it's made up of the characters window and door. But the door meaning was sort of gradually lost over time. And there's a very small collection of words like 徘徊 or 忐忑 or butterfly, 蝴蝶, 蝙蝠. These are words that the characters are literally only used in this specific conversation to make this one unique word. These are the exceptions, the small percentage of compound words where the logic just isn't transparent anymore, but there's such a tiny minority. The next type of word is duplicate words. They are simply the same character repeated twice. This shows up when talking about family members, expressing affection, casualness, or the meaning of every or all. For example, 妈妈, 爸爸, 看看, to have a look. It's more like casualness. Or 试试, to casually try something out. 天天 means every day, so it's literally day, and 人人 means person, meaning everybody. Next, we have the affixed words. These are compound words that use prefixes, infixes, or suffixes. There are only about 7 common prefixes in the entire language, but they're super common. So things like 老, old, in 老师, 老婆, 老外, and suffixes like 家, meaning expert, which gives you words like 艺术家, 科学家, or 作家. And finally, my personal favorite type of word. These are tiny sentences compressed into a single word. So the first character is the subject, the second is what happens to it or what it's like. So 地震 is a great example of this. Ground plus shake. So it's like a sentence, the ground shakes, the ground shook. 民主, citizens rule, that means democracy. 年轻, years are light, so it's describing the years as light, that means young. 口臭, mouth, stink, bad breath. 头疼, head, ache, headache. So those are the 7 types, and the reason I've walked through them is that every compound word example I'm about to show you fits into one of these categories. The vocabulary isn't randomly thrown together. There is a consistent structural system behind it, and once you see the system, the words practically teach themselves. Now you know the structures, let me take you on a tour through some of the most satisfying categories of Chinese words and pay attention to how consistently this logic holds up across completely different parts of the language. So let's start with technology. Think about how many English technology words are borrowed from Greek and Latin, and most people can't decode them, right? Television. Again, tele is Greek for far, visio is Latin for seeing, but how many English speakers actually know that? Right? Not many. In Chinese, the logic is right on the surface for everyone to see. So 电视, electric vision, that's television. 电话, electric speech, telephone. 电脑, electric brain, computer. 电影, electric shadow, movie. 电池, electric pool, as in a pool of liquid, that's battery. 电梯, electric ladder, elevator. Once you know the character 电, which means electric, you've just unlocked an entire category of modern vocabulary. Every one of these words builds on the same building block. Next up, transport. 火车 is fire vehicle. We already talked about that one earlier, meaning train. 汽车 is steam or gas vehicle. That means car. 自行车, self-moving vehicle. Any guesses? Bicycle. 出租车, rent vehicle. No, not a rental car. It's actually a taxi. 直升机, straight rise machine, helicopter. Now let's look at animals. This is where it gets really fun. 猫头鹰 is cat head eagle. That's an owl. I mean, that makes sense, right? Totally. If you think about it, like an owl is definitely just an eagle with a cat's face. Just look at an owl and tell me that's not perfect. 长颈鹿, long-necked deer. That's a giraffe. 河马, river horse, hippo. And funny enough, hippopotamus comes from the Greek for river horse too. Hippos plus potamus, same idea. But in Chinese, you can actually see it without needing to know the ancient Greek, of course. 熊猫 is bear cat, a panda. That makes sense too. Now this next category of words is where English really struggles and where Chinese really shines. Most English emotion words have completely buried origins. Happy, for example, comes from Middle English meaning lucky. Sad might come from Old English maybe, meaning full. Try explaining to a learner why those words mean what they mean today. You can't really. You have to make several leaps in logic to do that. And that's because the logic has been lost over many years. But with Chinese, I mean, happy is 开心, open heart. Your heart opens up. Sad in Chinese is 难过, difficult to pass through. 伤心 means to wound a heart. That means heartbroken or really upset by something. 担心 is a very common word. 担 means to carry something over your shoulder like a burden of some kind. And 心, of course, is heart. And the meaning is worried. 放心 means to release your heart. That's that feeling of relief. That's what that means. You let go of what was weighing on you. 热心, hot heart. enthusiastic, warm-hearted. 狠心, 狠 means fierce. And so 狠心 is ruthless. And then there's 小心, small heart. Now, that one's not immediately obvious, right? Small heart means be careful. But this is where it gets interesting because even when the logic isn't instantly transparent, the characters still give you something to grab onto. You could imagine, for example, your heart getting small and tight because you're stressed out about something. You're paying extra close attention. You're being careful. Now, it's not a perfect logical match, of course, but it is a connection. And that connection is more than enough to help you remember the word. And honestly, that's the case for maybe 5 to 10% of compound words in Chinese. They're not immediately obvious, but there's always something, at least a vague connection that helps you make a mnemonic association. So I'll come back to why that matters in a moment. Just look at that whole list. 6 different emotions and attitudes all built on the same character, 心, heart. And once you know that one character, you've got a logical foothold onto the entire emotional vocabulary. And it extends into science and nature too, right? 火山 is fire mountain, volcano. 地球, ground ball or earth ball, meaning earth. 恐龙 is terror dragon, meaning dinosaur. 银河, silver river, the Milky Way. 显微镜, literally reveal, small lens, microscope. Or 望远镜. Wang is like to gaze upon something, and yuan is far, and jing is lens, and that's a telescope. So in English, yeah, microscope actually comes from the Greek for small and look. The same logic, right, is there, but you do kind of need to know a little bit about ancient Greek to see it. In Chinese, you just need a few common characters. And actually, that's a really important point here. So English does have a lot of internal logic. It's just hidden behind a 门槛, a barrier to entry, as they say in Chinese. You need to know Greek and Latin to unlock it, and most people just don't. Whereas in Chinese, you can learn a few hundred common characters, which you can do surprisingly quickly with the right technique, and suddenly you're seeing the logic everywhere. That barrier to entry, that 门槛, is so much lower. Oh, and one more, because I just can't help myself, medicine and the body in general. 心脏, heart and organ, the heart. Not the heart we've been talking about before, the abstract one, that's the real heart, the actual organ. 牙医, tooth doctor, dentist. 感冒, to feel and rush out, a cold. 发烧, to emit and burn. You have a fever. Your body is emitting heat. 头疼, we talked about that one earlier as well. Head plus ache. Headache. 中药, Chinese medicine. 西药, Western medicine. I could go on and on, but I don't just want to talk about all the super logical Chinese words. There is a category of Chinese words that don't work in this really super logical way. They're actually not very logical based on their characters at all, but they are logical based on the sound. And those are the borrowed words, the loan words, words imported from other languages. For example, 沙发, right? 沙 is sand and fa is to send out or dispatch or emit. Now it has nothing to do with sofa, of course. It just sounds like sofa. Cafe is another one. Of course, it's coffee, right? It's just purely based on the sound. Those characters have nothing whatsoever to do with the final meaning of coffee. 巧克力, same thing. 逻辑 is logic, borrowed from the English word itself. But here's what's interesting. Even with borrowed words, Chinese does something pretty clever. When big brands enter the Chinese market, they don't just pick random characters that sound roughly like their company. They spend enormous amounts of money and time finding characters that sound like the brand name and carry a positive meaning as well. Let me give you some examples. So Coca-Cola is 可口可乐. Sounds like Coca-Cola, right? Great. But the characters actually mean delicious happiness. BMW is 宝马, precious horse. Perfect for a luxury car brand. Horses are a symbol of luck and prosperity in Chinese culture as well. Nike is 耐克. It sounds like Nike, of course, but the characters mean literally enduring and persevering. For a sportswear brand, again, very smart choice. Mercedes-Benz is 奔驰, which means to gallop. Colgate is 高露洁, revealing superior cleanliness. For a toothpaste brand, you can't really do much better than that, right? Reebok is 锐步, quick steps. Tide detergent is 太子, means to get rid of, dirt or stains. So even the borrowed words in Chinese end up more logical than their English originals because the characters carry meaning whether you want them to or not, right? Right, so everything I've shown you so far has been about how interesting and logical Chinese words are, and they are. But the most important part is what this means for you practically, because this isn't just a fun fact, right? It changes the entire way you build vocabulary. When you know the characters, you don't have to memorize every word from scratch. You can figure them out. If you know that dian means electric and you encounter a new word starting with dian, then you've already got a massive clue. If you know xin means heart, every new word with xin gives you an instant foothold on it. Think about the compound word types I just showed you earlier. If you see a verb followed by a result, you can work out the meaning just by asking what's the action and what's the outcome. And the more characters you learn, the more this compounds. So someone who knows 500 common characters doesn't just know 500 characters, they can deduce the meaning of thousands of compound words built from those same characters. It's not a one-for-one growth, it kind of snowballs exponentially. So when you're learning vocabulary, you need hooks, right? Things to grab onto that help words stick. In Chinese, the characters are that hook. So take 难过, for example, sad. If I just told you that, hey, the word for sad is 难过 with nothing else, you'd have to invent some creative way to connect that sound to sad. It's doable, but it's a lot of work for every single word. But if you know the characters 难, difficult, and 过, to pass through, the mnemonic, the connections practically build themselves. So if you've ever learned a European language, Spanish, French, Italian, you know what cognates are. These are words that look or sound very, very similar across all of these related languages because they all share a root, right, of Latin. An English speaker learning Italian sees possibile and immediately thinks, oh, possible. Informazione, information. These cognates give you a massive head start, right? Because you can recognize literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of words without ever studying them. Chinese does not have cognates with English. Zero. As far as I know. The languages are completely unrelated, and that's one of the things that makes Chinese feel so intimidating at first and genuinely take a bit longer to learn than the other more related languages. It's like every word seems brand new. But once you learn the characters, you create your own cognates, as it were. Each character becomes a root that unlocks dozens of compound words. The character 学, to study or learn, shows up in 学校, 学生, 学习, 大学, 科学, 数学. So once you know 学, all those words have a built-in cognate, if you like. You're not starting from zero anymore. And this is honestly the single most important reason to learn Chinese characters. Not just because you need them for reading, although you do. Not just because they're interesting, although they are. But because they turn what looks like an impossible vocabulary mountain into a system that gets easier and easier the more you learn. So each character is an investment and the returns compound.
看完了 Luke 的这番硬核拆解，不知道大家作何感想？小满最大的感受是震撼与自豪。这位博主的心态转变非常具有代表性，从一个被中文天书般的表意文字折磨的英语母语者，到深入汉字机理，最终被其底层的逻辑严密性所折服。他用一种近乎解剖学的方式，将中文的7大构词法动宾、动补、偏正、并列等条分缕析地展现在我们面前。在这个过程中 ，Luke 对中文的评价已经从最初的难学，升华为了对一种高度智慧和高度自制系统的赞叹。他甚至直言，只要掌握了几百个基础汉字，就能像滚雪球一样呈指数级的解锁成千上万个词汇。这种规律性是在被多种外来语生硬缝合的英语中很难体会到的。更重要的是，这不仅仅是一个关于背单词技巧的分享，透过语言的表象，我们看到的是文明的韧性。英语之所以成为今天的样子，是因为英国本土不断被外族征服，语言被迫妥协混血，而中文之所以能保持3000多年来如此惊人的稳定性与生命力，正是源于中华文明从未真正中断的文化底色。每一个汉字都是一块承载着历史与智慧的基石，它们组合在一起，不仅构建了我们日常交流的桥梁，更筑起了一座无法被轻易撼动的文化堡垒。今天，当我们在感叹中文的博大精深时，更应该感恩这份流淌在血液里的文化基因。我是小满，我们下期再见。